I've been knocked down in my life a lot and had to pick up the pieces and move forward. The only thing that's going to stop you from doing something is you. And therefore, if you set your mind to it and it doesn't work out the first time, then you go back at it, which is what I did with the RCMP, which is what I did with my health. And just over and over in life, the only thing that will stop you is you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to One World Countless Stories podcast with me, Selena Novello. Today, I have Cynthia on, and I am so excited to hear about her story. Now, I met Cynthia when I joined a fempreneurs group when I was 17 years old, and ever since I met her, I've been following along her journey, and it has just been so inspiring. Her and my aunt actually got partnered up, and so they got to develop a really strong connection. It just felt so inspired by everything she's done with her career and how she's pivoted after her career. And so I had to have her on the podcast today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm just thrilled to be here. Well, my journey, my name is Cynthia Hamilton Urquhart, and I was a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and I'm saying the full name in case you have some podcast listeners that are not from Canada. So I served for 25 and a half years. Retired about 11 years ago, and 2 years after I retired, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So that just pivoted my life, and I was completely unprepared for it. But I was really blessed to get some really good mental health care. And the funny thing about it is 8 months before I was diagnosed, my husband was also diagnosed with it. He served the RCMP for 35 and a half years. And so between the two of us, it was quite a journey, really trying to figure out what mental health was all about and how to start taking care of ourselves, because we were accustomed to looking after everybody else. Right. During that journey, I realized that as first responders, we really didn't know how to care for ourselves, and that most of our professions really didn't put enough importance on mental health care. The conversation is starting today, but we still have a long way to go. So I started to focus on what would a conversation look like, and how do I reach out to former colleagues or people who are struggling with mental health. What is the public's understanding of the role of a first responder, and do they really understand the sacrifices that we make to keep them safe, or to keep the communities safe? So I've had this incredible journey since that time, and in hindsight, I can actually say that my PTSD diagnosis was a gift, because for the first time in my life, I realized that, you know what, I need to care for myself. Wow. So I am a mother of 5 children, a blended family, and 6 grandchildren. Our kids live pretty much in the West. My husband and I do everything together. He's my best friend. So we love to hike and walk and cycle and travel, and just about anything you can embrace. And as you can well imagine, when you've been a police officer, you have an appreciation for life that is extremely deep, because you understand how complex and difficult our life journey is. So I love to laugh. I love being around people, and I love what I'm doing right now. And anytime I have an opportunity to speak, and I'm just so thrilled that you asked me onto your show, especially when young people, because if we can start passing that message on to people at your age, then hopefully you won't have to deal with the same issues that we have. And our struggles haven't been for nothing.
Absolutely. I agree. Wow. That was a great introduction. I have so many things that I'm excited to talk to you about, especially about your career and the mental health aspect of it all. And I think it's going to be a great conversation today. But I want to get started with a little bit about your childhood. Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like for you growing up?
Sure. Well, first of all, I was adopted as an infant. I was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, but I was brought up in New Brunswick. And my adoptive parents were absolutely incredible. They had a 15-year-old daughter who was their natural daughter.
Mhm.
Prior to me coming into the family, they had adopted another little boy, and then 2 years later, I was adopted. So my parents were older. They were 40 and 44 years old. And part of that journey for me with my family was that my brother, who had been adopted, completely lost his eyesight by the time he was 9 years old.
Wow.
So I grew up with a sibling who had a lot of challenges in life. And it was a blessing. It was a curse and a blessing because obviously I was introduced to how difficult life could be and how cruel people could be at a very young age. But I also developed a sense of wanting to be protective and help people at that age. So, that being said, I still had a wonderful childhood. I had always wanted to be a nurse, and that did not come to fruition. That's another story, and ended up going to university, made the decision to become a police officer, and then joined the RCMP in 1985.
Wow, awesome. So could you tell us a little bit more about your post-secondary journey and how you went from nursing to policing?
Yeah, it's kind of funny how life works out. Well, I had wanted to be a nurse because my older sister, and she was 17 years older than me, was a nurse. So
Oh,
that's what
wow.
I saw. And I just thought that that would be a great job. What happened was when I graduated from high school, I had applied to nursing, or just before I graduated. It turned out that one of the courses that I had taken, the university wouldn't accept. And again, that was confusion and conversation. So it dropped my average down by 2 marks below where I needed to get in for nursing. So it
Wow.
was yeah, it was very frustrating. But what I did, I thought, okay, I will get my arts degree. I'll go into the first year, take all the nursing courses I can, and then I'll go into nursing in my second year.
Oh,
Um, but in the meantime, I met someone and he was applying to the RCMP. I decided to focus on criminology courses or sociology courses.
yeah.
We couldn't get a degree in criminology in those days, but sociology was the closest.
Right.
And I really started to realize how our system and how we put people through our system um, was would impact, or the type of people that were ending up in the system. And most of them were vulnerable. They came from very difficult backgrounds. They didn't have the same advantage that I did.
Mhm.
And I decided I wanted to pursue that. So I became interested in the RCMP. Now, it was a 4-year process for me to get in. So in the interim,
Mhm.
I was able to get my degree and then joined the RCMP about 3 months later. But it was a lengthy process to go through.
And can you tell us a little bit about the process and what it was for you?
To get into the RCMP?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very interesting because back in those days, women had only been accepted into the RCMP in 1974. So this was only 11 years later. And the RCMP was actually one of the last policing organizations to accept women. Um,
Mhm.
so I was very excited about it. And the interesting thing with my parents, that they were older parents. My dad was born in 1919 and my mom in 1923, but they had no gender specific roles. So in our home, even though they came from that era,
Yeah.
my father probably did more cooking than my mom, more cooking and cleaning than my mom. My dad worked full time. My mom
Mhm.
worked full time most of the time. And so it was just never an issue for me. And they were very excited for me that I wanted to join the RCMP. So the process was there was a physical fitness test, there was an exam, a basic entry exam that we had to write. You had to be a Canadian citizen. And
Mhm.
then it was interviews, physicals. They interviewed friends, family, neighbors, the RCMP did,
Wow.
to make sure that you were the appropriate character to take on that role and responsibility. And at the time, there was a freeze on hiring, which is why it took 4 years. So I had applied, but everything stopped for 2 years, and then the process started up again. Now, part of the process, and this is really interesting, is that my first big interview with them, I didn't pass, and I didn't pass because I didn't have enough life experience. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because the reality of policing, when I first applied, I was 19.
Yeah.
And when I look back, I really did not have a lot of life experience. I had grown up in a family that was very loving. I did have some events in my life that were difficult, but nothing that really would have prepared me for policing. I hadn't even ever lived away from home. And the officer who interviewed me, he just put my file on hold for a year, and he said, "I'd like you to go out and get some life experience." So in that time, tragically, my mother passed away the next year. I also had moved out of my home and moved myself to Quebec City to learn French, and lived there for 4 months. So I actually, as disappointed as I was initially,
Yeah.
it was something that gave me an opportunity to grow. And I recognized later in my policing service, thank heavens I did not get in initially, because I would not have been prepared to handle what policing brings.
Right. And when someone tells you that you need more life experience, what was your first initial thoughts, and how were you like, what were your next steps after that? Because I mean, when
Well,
someone tells me like you need more life experience, I'm like, okay. I'm like, I
like
don't know
what
what to do. I guess I just keep living then.
Yeah. Well, I have to say they were great, because they actually gave me some ideas. So one was
Oh, wow.
move, they said you could be transferred to the other side of the country. You haven't even lived away from home on your own. You haven't had to pay your own bills. We didn't have cell phones back in those days, or things that you would pay for separately. So it was a very valid point. And I was thinking, yep, that's true. I never have. What if I get really homesick? And so I think if any of your listeners are having somebody's telling them that, it's just recognize, make sure you ask, like, what specifically are you looking for? And then honestly, take a look at what your life experience is, and speak to people who are older and say, what would you see would be good for me to do to get more life experience? And in that 4 year period, life happened, and I volunteered even more. I just took everything that I had been doing and took it up to another level. I even took some courses in university that one of them allowed us to do some ride-alongs with the local police force, and I really got to see some things there that were very eye-opening as well. So anything I could to get more experience that would make my ability to kind of transition into that role is what I jumped on, and it paid off really well. It was great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you mentioned that you lost your mom within that period as well. What impact did that have on you?
Oh, it was absolutely devastating. I was only 20, and she had been diagnosed with cancer, and from the time of her diagnosis to the time that she passed was only 6 months.
Um,
um, and it was devastating, but it's really not until a little bit later on in life you really understand what you lose. You lose those opportunities to have that person to call and run things by.
yeah,
When I got married, when my children were born, all of those things, milestones in life, and they're not there,
mhm,
um, are are uh, they they're crushing, and eventually you learn to live with it. And what I mean from that, the pain's always there.
yeah.
I can still get tears today when I think about it.
Oh,
It just becomes part of who you are. But in our family, we were very fortunate, because you know she's still in the conversation. So
yes.
she didn't pass on from our world as far as that goes. Her love was with us. We would laugh about things, well, if mom was here, she would say this or do that. But
Mm,
it forced me to grow up very quickly, because my dad was 65 years old at the time when she passed. I had a handicapped brother, and he wasn't just blind; he also had some intellectual challenges as well. So, caring for him, and my sister had 4 children of her own, so she had her hands full with that. So it really forced me to grow up, and honestly, in my policing career, it was very helpful in my ability to connect and relate to what people were going through when I was dealing with deaths, which again is something that we have to deal with all too frequently in policing.
Yeah. And is grieving a huge process? Do you learn about grieving in the police academies, or did you have to kind of learn that on your own?
Well, that is a very loaded question. It's a great question because part of policing is the ability to deal with circumstances that are absolutely tragic, and you
Yeah.
have to be able to do your job. So you have to be able to push emotions aside so that you can provide the support for the people that you need. The problem is, in our world, we're so busy and so many calls are coming in, is that you don't have time to process grief appropriately, which we have to. Grief is held in our body. And if you don't process it, if you don't allow yourself to feel the feelings,
Mhm.
um, then it piles up, and it's like a bucket of water. Eventually, it's going to overflow. It may not at the time, and in our day, like I said, mental health was not something we talked about.
Mhm.
Your listeners and yourself are probably aware of the stigma of mental health. Well, in a first responder world, it's even greater. So, the public looks at us and has created this idea that first responders were strong and, we're tough, and we can handle it. And what that does is we hide who we are, which is we're human beings, and we do
Yes.
need to process things just like you do or anyone does.
Mhm.
So, in my own personal side, from my mother's perspective, when my mother passed, I grieved for a bit, but I think I pushed it aside, which it's very common. And then I got into my work world, and when somebody goes into a first responder profession, we all endure things in life and tragedies and have different things that go on. And so you bring that with you to that job. So
Yeah.
your bucket may already be 3/4 full. Maybe it's only a quarter full, but eventually the traumas and tragedies that you see in the police world are going to continue to pile up on what you've already got.
Mhm.
And if you don't deal with grief and sadness and all the things that come with life, even in general, then
Yeah.
it will catch up to you for sure.
Yeah, and it's just in general too, when you don't deal with the things that you're going through, they just pile up, build up.
Mm,
Because I know in my life there's been multiple times where I was like just trying to shove it down. I'm like,
mm,
I don't want to deal with this. And then it always comes up, and there was things that I would do that would just trigger it, and then all of a sudden I'd be a mess. And so I can imagine that in the police world, like first
mhm,
responders, it's taking all of your baggage, your trauma, and
mhm.
maybe you don't deal with it already, and you go in and you're more vulnerable in certain situations because it will trigger you, remind you of things. And so I'm curious to know, from when you started to when you finished, what
Mhm.
was the difference in the conversation about mental health?
In my years, so when I can tell you a circumstance that occurred, and it will kind of tell. So realistically, mental health, we just made a very quick reference to it when I joined. Just, you're going to see things that'll be difficult, or you should talk about things if they bother you. It was a box that was checked off on a list,
Right.
basically, right? And it wasn't any more than that. As I progressed through my career, the stigma was huge. So if somebody went off on, stress leave, there was whispers. They were almost ostracized, and you wouldn't see them. You didn't know what was going on with them.
Mhm.
I sadly knew people who took their lives throughout my career,
Wow.
who were police officers, and but it was always just kind of kept in the background.
Yeah.
And then I had my own incident in 2008. I had shown up to my husband and I, just to give a bit of background, transferred. I lived in 6 different provinces, like we moved 9 times. It was great because we got to see the country. And we had arrived in Regina, Saskatchewan, and our training academy is there. My husband had a position outside of the academy, but I was going to be teaching. And I showed up at my first day to teach. I was meeting my new colleagues, and we were responsible for 32 people for 6 months to take them through the training program. And on that first, and I had no idea what was going to be involved. I hadn't asked to be a teacher. It was just a set of circumstances that I ended up having to take the position.
Right.
And on that first day, when they showed me that we had 15 manuals of books to teach, and you have to teach this understanding that, you've got the lives of these people in your hands, because once they graduate, you want to make sure that they're the best they can be.
Right.
And I just stood there and my mind went blank and I couldn't say anything. The tears were ready to fall, and I had to leave and just tell them I was sick. And I had a complete breakdown. And
Wow.
what we know, it was a PTSD, but the term PTSD was not even brought up in
Mhm.
2008, that could have been potentially what was going on.
Mhm.
So it really shows you how much there was to learn from that point forward. I was put off work for 3 months. I did go to counseling, and came back, went back to work, and then I had another very difficult set of circumstances occur, which I'll talk about later.
Mhm.
Again, now when I retired, it really in 2011, we were still not big on the conversation, and it's only been, I would say, really, Selena, in the past 5 or 6 years, where we're really starting to see the conversation change.
Mhm.
That being said, the problem is access to mental health care for first responders, and really for anybody.
Yes.
COVID, frontline workers, doctors, nurses, there's burnout because everybody's struggling because we don't have enough people,
Yeah.
staff. So if you're concerned about your coworkers, and even though you're struggling, how do you go off sick and leave them even busier? It's still complicated. And what I say is that mental health care, especially for first responders, it's complicated and it's inconvenient and it's expensive.
Yes.
You know what happens with governments when something's expensive. So,
Mhm.
but the reality is, if the public and society wants to have their first responders healthy so they can continue to support people, they have to be willing to invest in what's needed for mental health care, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm advocating for big time right now.
Mhm. And I love that perspective that you're sharing with everyone, that we need to pour into the first responders so they can keep serving us the way that we want them to show up. And I love that way of saying it, because it's really shedding light on that there is serious issues. And yes, getting mental health help for everyone can be a struggle because it's expensive and blah,
Yeah.
blah, 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 all the things. But for the first responders, even more, because they go through things that we don't understand, or we don't know how to, we don't know what you guys go through, because a lot of the time, if it's on the news, it's on the news, but other than that, we don't really know what you guys do every single day. And I really love the saying, like, you can't judge someone unless you walk 10 miles in their shoes, because you really don't know what someone's going through. And so I'm curious for you, you said you had a breakdown in 2008 with the
Right.
teacher. Can you
Right.
tell us a little bit more about that experience and why you think there was a breakdown?
Yeah. It was, so what happened was that I was so overwhelmed. So when I look back at it now and understand what the symptoms of PTSD were, a sense
Mhm.
of overwhelm, not wanting to be around people, not being able to think or function or make decisions. I mean, I had all of the classic symptoms, and I had just moved. In 2006, we left New Brunswick, which is where we were posted at that time.
Mhm.
2007, and moved to Newfoundland. 2007, in December, we were moving to Ottawa. 2008, we were moving. So 4 provinces in like 2 years, all
Mhm.
the moves, and then all of the other things that were going on. It was too much for me to cope with. And our two youngest boys were moving with us. During that time, I was also diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder that was life-threatening. I had open heart surgery 6 months after I returned from my mental health break at where I was teaching. So
Wow.
it was too much in life that was going on, and I wasn't taking care of myself because I was taking care of everybody else, and it was all
Mhm.
about my work. Looking after my children, looking after just my family unit and everything else. So, as
Mhm.
far and never taking a time to go, you know what, I need to check in with me,
Yeah.
and checking in with me was not something I even realized I needed to do, which is crazy. I was a university educated woman, very worldly, stayed on top of things. Sociology, psychology were huge topics for me. And yet, still, when
Yeah.
I was diagnosed with PTSD, I was absolutely dumbfounded. I had no idea. And my husband actually tricked me into treatment.
Oh,
He
wow.
into a meeting. He recognized after his own diagnosis, he was recognizing symptoms in me. My
Mhm.
symptoms were different than his, and I had no idea. I didn't even know that women could get PTSD.
Okay.
And I just had the what I call the Hollywood version of PTSD, which is the soldier, the man fighting in a war that comes back and that's what most of us in society were familiar with. And
Mhm.
then it was so much more than that. So the journey, and as I go on my mental health advocacy journey for first responders and anyone actually, if we didn't understand it ourselves, how would you expect the public to do it? And I think, Selena, you made a really good point about, you know, other people understanding it, is that if people took 2 seconds to think, the first responders deal with the things that nobody else wants to deal with, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to deal with the things that I dealt with in policing, and
Yeah.
probably your family doesn't, and probably your friends don't. And that's fine. Like, that's why we do that job. But I think what people have forgotten is, like, just a second, these people are willing to deal with those things. And it's not just us, Selena, it's our families. And a lot of people miss the fact that when you're a first responder, it's not just you, it's your family that also suffers the consequences of the very difficult job that you do.
Absolutely. And that is so interesting to hear. And I'm so happy that you're on this journey to advocate for mental health. And I would love to talk about how you're doing that in just a little bit. But I'm still curious on your journey. When you were in the police field, did
Mhm.
you have a hard time kind of like turning it off? So would you go home, as you talk about families and the effect on families, did you have a hard time turning it off or not bringing things home with you? What were like your strategies and what did you do when you were in the field?
Well, basically, the coming home part for any first responder is really difficult. And so I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
If you've dealt with a call where there's been a tragedy, perhaps a fatal car accident, and you've had to deal with the victims, you've had to deal with the families, or done a death notification to someone and told them that their loved one has passed away. And then, so you've been dealing, and typically our shifts were very long, like 10 hours at least, or you could go much longer depending on what the circumstances were. So you've been dealing with all of this emotional stuff all day long. You come home and you've promised your spouse and your children that you would take them out for dinner, and your parents are going to be there and your friends are going to be there. So you go to that event and everybody's laughing and having fun, and you're sitting there carrying the weight of the grief of the people that you've dealt with.
Yeah.
And so we do shut it off, but that is the problem. We stuff it and we
Mm.
shove it aside till we get to a point where we can't. So in my healthy years, now, since I've retired, and this is what they work on for members who are struggling, or even just to be proactive with mental health, is find things that will help ground you and get you through that. So therapy is something every first responder should be going to, even in a proactive sense, like the same way we go to a doctor and hopefully get a yearly physical or every couple of years. Same thing with mental health. Do a check-in.
Yeah.
For my husband and I, being out in nature is a great way to deal with things. Writing for myself is something I found when I was in treatment,
Mhm.
was a game changer for me. Being able to talk about it, recognizing that mental health struggles and asking for help, it's actually a sign of strength because it means you've endured and you've been through something, and now you're looking for support for it. So all of those things, we all have ways to deal with it and we all have to push things aside to be able to do our job as a first responder. It doesn't mean that a tear won't fall sometimes or that there aren't calls where we do show more emotion, but typically we just leave it, we leave it aside. They do have debriefs now, so you debrief the incident and talk about it, and there are different sets of circumstances, but the judgment is still there and the stigma is still there. And that's what, as first responders, we all have to work on so that anybody can disclose that they're having a hard time without feeling that they're weak.
Right. Yeah. And that's a huge thing that first responders, I bet they feel it way more. But I've heard a lot of people where they, like, especially male, they feel like they cannot cry because that will show that they're weak. And it is
Mhm.
changing. It is changing. There
Yeah.
is slow
Yeah.
progress. It's happening. But when I hear that, I was like, yeah, I've heard a lot of people when they say, like, well, I don't want to ask for help because then I'm weak. And
Yeah.
that's not the case, but there's so much stigma over it. And I love what you said, that there's actually so much strength in asking for help, because I believe that as well. When you raise your hand and say, I need help, it does so much that you don't even know. It could help somebody in your family as well, because they see you taking a different route and not staying stuck where you are. One thing I want to talk a little bit more is PTSD. For the listeners who might not be as aware of what that is, or they don't even know what that is, could you share with us what that is and a little bit about it?
Sure. So post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental illness that results that occurs to you when you have endured a traumatic event, and typically, so it can happen just after one event, depending on what the circumstances of the event were,
Mhm.
um, depending on potentially what your background is and how you respond to the event. So it's a very difficult traumatic event that typically involves a death, whether it's your own death, a threat, whether it's, your life is threatened, somebody else's life is threatened, or you see somebody who is injured or killed. So something very traumatic. And what happens is that the memory of the incident, instead of being processed like a healthy memory, and I'll give you an example so they can understand it,
Yeah.
it's stuck and your mind is on a loop, so that it just keeps going around and around. And this is just a kind of a Reader's Digest version of it, but it
Right.
just gets stuck in your mind and it's not processed appropriately. And
Mhm.
so the memories of the incident will take over, and all of a sudden, you may be hyper aroused. So things like a loud noise will make you jump. You can't sleep. You're looking over your shoulder all the time. So there's lots of different things that happen with it. So the way I explain it to people, it's kind of like, pretend we're at a shoe factory and you put the materials for the shoe on a conveyor belt and it goes through the machinery does what it needs to do, the shoe comes out at the end, you put it in the box and you put it on a shelf, and when you want the shoes, you take the box down, right?
Mhm.
So a memory is like that. A memory should come, an event comes in, it's processed, it comes out the other side, it's stored in your brain. And when you want to retrieve the memory, oh, yeah, I remember that summer, you go get it and you share it. But with PTSD, it's like that the processing part, the machine breaks down. So the shoe doesn't get processed. So it sits there and it sits there and it sits there. And you see it every time you walk by that conveyor belt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's a great
Yeah.
example.
Yeah, it's very easy to visualize it. So what therapy does is that it takes that memory, it tries to repair it and then push that shoe or that memory through. Now, it doesn't mean that you will never think about those tragic incidents anymore. But what happens is that when you think about them, you're not back there and the tears don't come. PTSD, for some people, they can manage it very well and feel like they no longer have it. With first responders, what's very common is that they help us, give us tools. So we have a toolbox to go to when things happen. So both my husband and I were diagnosed with complex PTSD, which what they say about that is it typically means that there's been events also in your own life that have contributed to the PTSD. And then, of course, with PTSD, it tends to be multiple traumas. So if you have someone perhaps who was abused their whole life, or child sexual abuse, or those types of things that go on and on. Yeah, so it's just our bodies are so traumatized by what's happened. So if you take a police officer and you think even in one day they can go through more traumas than a person may go through in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so it piles up and piles up.
And that is just an extra, like, it's just so crazy to think about. And I love having conversations with people who are first responders, because it really gives me another perspective where I'm like, wow, like it kind of checks me a little bit, where it's like there's a lot going on and there's a lot of people who go through a lot of things. And to that last comment that you just made, to say that sometimes on the first day of a policeman's or a first responder's job, they could have more traumas than a person's ever experienced in their whole life, is just crazy.
Yeah.
And I love the way that you explained PTSD. It really helps me too as well understand it a little bit more. With the shoe analogy, that's a great way of thinking about it. And I'm curious a little bit more about your and your husband's struggle and how you guys overcame. I know you said that you were always helping everyone else. You were probably in the role of just helper. You helped your family, you helped the society, you helped the world you were in. So how did you start to go, oh, wait, that's not healthy for me. I need to start working on myself. So can you bring us through that journey?
Yeah. Again, a really good question. And I think what's really important for your listeners, as I explain this, to understand too, is that a mental health journey and needing help this is a journey that nobody should do by themselves. It's impossible to do it on your own. You need to have the support of the professionals who know what they're doing and know how to help you with that journey. So my husband was diagnosed first, and like I said to you earlier on, the symptoms of PTSD can be different for different people. My husband had what I would call more traditional, kind of moody, irritable, very hypervigilant, these types of things that people were probably more familiar with. And I especially found him being short-tempered, like something had really switched. So it was easier for me to process and get him into care. For myself, my symptoms tended to be, I kept everything inside. So what happened with that was, instead of going outward and going after people for saying something the wrong way or this, I was just shutting down. I was overwhelmed. I couldn't make decisions. I was fatigued all the time. I had been really good at multitasking, because obviously we had a blended family with 5 kids, and we were both police officers. So all of those things were skill sets I had and were very strong, and they just started to fall by the wayside. So once we were both diagnosed with PTSD, you're right, you've got 2 people under the same roof with PTSD. How does that work as a husband and wife?
Yeah.
And it was quite a journey. We were both very fortunate because we were treated at the Operational Stress Injury Clinic here in Calgary. Because we were with the RCMP, and it was a federal organization, we had access to incredible care, and not all first responders get that access, which is sad. So for myself, it was 3.5 years of treatment. For my husband, it was longer. And we both still check in with mental health therapists once a month.
Mhm.
just to keep ourselves going. So we had moments that were chaotic. There was times I would trigger him, he would trigger me, and we would both be spinning. But what happened was, with the tools we were able to utilize, we were very big about communicating, and that's where it was. So if I had said something that upset him, or if he had said something that upset me, we would take a step back. We would try to say, okay, what's the real issue? What's really going on? And we both worked hard with each other. We worked separately, but we worked together.
Yes.
And it's not a journey that I would recommend for a lot of people. It was tough, but we are so close. And like I said, he's my best friend, and
Yeah.
we really had to be willing to accept help from other people. That was the key. And it's what I advocate for anybody. It's
Mm.
honestly, it's no different that if you were told you had cancer or you broke a leg, would you try to deal with that by yourself? You never would. Nobody would. And so mental health is the same thing. So if we could get this stigma dealt with, and
Mhm.
look at ourselves as, we have physical and mental health. It's one thing, it's our health. So instead of categorizing one as being something bad and the other as being, something that's okay.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was a difficult journey, but it was about communication, reaching out for help, and reaching out over and over and over again when we needed that support.
Yeah, and I have another question along with that. And a lot of times, a lot of people have a hard time asking for the help or getting
Mhm.
to that point where they need to ask for help. So, was there did that arise in your situation as well? I know you said that your husband kind of tricked you, but was there a moment where you were like, okay, I really need to get help? And then also, like, what advice would you give to others who are struggling in that zone where they kind of feel like, I don't know, like they have that the stigma's really there, but they just feel like they can't ask for help. What advice would you give? There's kind of two parts to that question.
Yeah. Okay. So, and if I miss one part, just remind me
Yes,
again. So,
yes, yes.
I think the first thing to understand is that telling people you're worth it. You're worth it. It's about you. It's about loving yourself. It's about understanding no matter what set of circumstances fall upon us, when something is new and we don't know about it, we need to reach out to ask for help. If our car breaks down, I couldn't go out there and try to fix it by myself. I would need to go get help, no matter what. And I know there's not a stigma to that stuff, but it's the same concept. It's like, I'm worth it. I'm not understanding what's going on. So if by chance, if I do need extra support, that's a great thing. If I don't, and I think it's just to talk to someone that you trust, and it doesn't have to be just somebody in your family dynamic. And nowadays, we have so many resources out there. You can go online. There's a mental health line that will be coming up, I think, in 2023. A number of the states just brought one up. So there's lots of areas where you can just throw the information out there. You don't have to do it face to face, just to see if it makes you feel more comfortable. Let
Mhm.
someone who is familiar with mental health have a conversation with you. And then, or if you can talk to a trusted friend, and I know all of that sounds cheesy and everybody says that, but it's really true. And I think it's just remembering that you're worth it. You
Yeah.
you deserve to be cared for. You deserve to get the care you need, and you deserve to be the best you can be. And
Mhm.
by reaching out and asking for help, you give yourself that advantage.
Yeah, that is such a powerful message. And I love the way you are framing this for everyone. And like when you said that if your car breaks down, what do? You go bring it into the shop and you get help. And when you break your arm, like you said, what do? You go to the doctors and you get help.
Mhm.
And it's like, I'm like, why don't we do that with mental health? And that's like the big question, that it's like, how can we become more in tune with ourselves and be able to say, well, yep, today I am not doing so well. Maybe I need to talk to someone or check in. And I know recently for me, I have always been a talker. And I know that when I just get it out of my head, whether it's writing it down or talking to someone, I feel so much better. Even if there's no solution to the problem, because I was someone who's like, there's a problem, I need a solution, I need to fix it. Like I was in fixer. I was always trying to
Yeah.
fix. And and for me now, I'm to a point where I can just talk about it and there be no solution and I still feel so much better. But recently, I was like, no, like I need to be stronger. I need to figure out how to do this on my own. And it actually has led me in a more negative route where I was really, really like, whoa, like I need to do this for myself and I need to give my permission to myself to say, you know what? You're allowed to talk about it. You're allowed to go out there and talk. And it's kind of shocking sometimes when I say that because I'm such a talker, but it's all about learning and figuring out what's with your body and listening to your body and going on that journey. And like you said, knowing that you're worth it and it's okay to get the help. And so I hope if you're listening to this, you feel like you're worth it and you have permission to get help if you need it. And that there's so many different ways you can go about it. We are so lucky today to have all of the resources online, like you said, the telephone line as well. We are so lucky to have what we have, and it can get better and better. It will keep getting better and better, but at least we have somewhere to start. So I'm really, really thankful that you said that and talked about that. And one other part of that question was there an issue for you to get help? Did you feel like maybe I don't want to get help? Was there ever any challenges that you had with getting help?
Yeah, I mean, I had access to help, but the first hurdle was my own, which I felt like I had failed because I had PTSD. It was very clear. And I think being a female in a male-dominated profession, we worked twice as hard to get
Yeah.
half the recognition. And that's what it was like back when I joined. 4% of police officers in the RCMP when I joined were women. It was only 4%. It's up to
Wow.
22% now. So I was ashamed. I felt like I had let my organization down. I felt like I had let women down.
Wow.
So it was extremely difficult. I think what I now know about it, and you had mentioned about, saying to yourself, oh, I need to be stronger. I think what I've learned, and it's one of the things I tell people, is that we need to redefine what strength means. What a strong person looks like.
Mhm.
I now know today that strength, especially in first responders, means allow yourself to be human, allow yourself to ask for the help that you need.
Yeah.
And we have a vision of what strong is, and we all do it. Well, I'm not strong enough. So for me, my diagnosis meant I was a failure. And it was very deep, and it was I didn't want anybody to know that I had PTSD. I didn't know how to talk about it
Mhm.
or advocate. And in fact, I had a social event that I had attended where a woman said to me, how do you weed out the weak ones? The ones that can't do the job anymore. And I didn't have an answer for that
Yeah.
because I still didn't know how to define what strength meant. I now know today strength means I realize that I'm struggling and I need help and I'm going to go get it. Strength means I realize I'm having a hard time and that's okay. Strength means um, I am, this is who I am, and I am still strong. Not saying
Mhm.
strength looks like one vision of what we in society decide that strength is. So when we start to determine it, and by having these conversations about mental health, you hear this all the time, but it's very true. You start to normalize.
Yeah.
Hey, guess what, guys? Sorry, I'm late for coffee. I just went to my therapist.
Yeah.
And not be embarrassed to say, I was just at my therapist. Oh, you were at a therapist? Yep. I go to work through things so that I can be the healthiest version of myself, whatever that looks like. And
Mhm.
I know it's not always that simple. And I know you're going to have listeners who are feeling really, really low. And my response to that is, life is really difficult.
Mhm.
life journey is not easy. There's twists and turns and ups and down, and we get slammed. It's still beautiful, and it can still be incredible, but it is really, really difficult. And because of that, is that keep pushing through. Remember that you're strong and never give up on yourself and reach out to the people around you.
Wow, it's just so powerful. I love listening to you talk because you have a way of sharing what you've been through and also inspiring us. And I love what you said about the conversation about mental health. The more we talk about it, the more we can normalize, the better it will go. I remember one instant where you were just talking about when you told someone that you were like, "Oh, I was late for coffee. I was at therapy." I remember I volunteered at a youth group, and I told these 13-year-olds that I work with, and I told them that, yeah, I go to get counseling and therapy, and they were like, what? And I'm like, yeah. And I was like, it really helps me. And I love to work on myself. And I feel like for me, that is why I share so much, because I want people to feel like it's okay. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to have a really bad day and then a really great day. It's normal. But it's hard because we have lots of things like social media showing us people's highlights reels, and we're seeing a lot
Mm.
of different things, and these things aren't talked about as much on there. Again, I am seeing we're getting a little bit better and better, but it's still really interesting, even when I was talking to the younger generation, how surprised they were when I said that I got counseling. But now if they ever needed help, they know that that's an option and it's okay, and it's not like a crazy thing to do. And so I totally agree with you in that the conversation just needs to keep happening and keep talking about it. Of course, to your own comfort level. I'm not saying like you have to go out and tell everyone what you're
Right,
doing.
right.
But to the people who feel like they want to share, it is such a powerful tool. And that is why I have this podcast too, because I think it's so powerful when we share our stories and share what we've been through. And like for you here today to tell us everything you've already told, I feel like I've gained so much in just listening to the things that you've been through and also the way that you have shown up for others. So now I'm really curious to know how you have took everything that you've been through and everything that you learned, and now you are a mental health advocate for
First
first
responders. Yeah,
responders. Thank you.
yeah.
For first responders, and I want to know how you do that, what you do now to be that ally and show up and share the message.
Sure. Yeah. So what I do, I have a website. It's just cynthiahamiltonurquhart.com. And it's basically a landing page for people who are struggling to come on. They can see what I went through in my life journey, where it's taken me, and hopefully make them feel comfortable to reach out and ask for help.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm also an author. And I was in the Women of Inspiration Universal Women's Network book for Unsung Hero Award. And my life story, what I believe is that is by sharing our stories, and especially our life stories and our experiences and our struggles, that can be somebody else's survival guide. As soon as they hear the story, all of a sudden it gives them hope. So I actually I speak and I write and I mentor women who are in non-traditional roles,
Mhm.
and yeah, it's just every opportunity that I have an Instagram account. I've
Mhm.
had an article written in our quarterly magazine, the RCMP's magazine, and Community
Mhm.
Now magazine. So I'm just getting to a point where I really want to be a voice for first responders, to say it is okay to be struggling. It's okay to acknowledge our job is a really difficult job.
Mhm.
And again, hoping to bring out the conversation within the public to say, hey, we can't just forget about our first responders. And the police have had an extremely difficult 2 or 3 years
Mhm.
with the Black Lives Matter movement, which needed to happen. We needed change. I agree with everything that's gone on there. We had to relook and at things, but what's difficult is that for the first responders or the police officers that are doing their job how they're supposed to be doing it. It's a very difficult job, and we're still having police officers take their lives because of the difficulty and the stress. And what's happened, Selena, just as a very quick aside, is just that, you know, the police have been used to try to solve all the problems in society. You know, when the healthcare system doesn't work, when the education system doesn't work, when social services is overwhelmed, and we do need a rework, and we do need more resources so that we can do the jobs that we were supposed to be doing, right?
Mhm.
Excuse me.
So,
I need a little bit of water here.
oh yes, no problem.
Yes. So this gives me an opportunity to have those conversations. And not everybody is capable of having them because they're tough conversations, but they're conversations that we all want our communities to be safe and secure. And we all want to be able to support our first responders the best way we can. So with what I'm doing, and by the mentoring, speaking, writing, I'm really hoping to be able to make a difference. And at my age, I'm kind of in the third act of my life.
Mhm.
If I can use all of my experiences in life to inspire and help to create change, then it will have been worth everything.
Yeah, totally. And congratulations on the awards and the book.
Thank you.
And what is you wrote a book, right? You said you wrote a book.
No, so I'm in. It's the article in it, but I am actually in the process of creating a prompted guided first responder journal.
Oh,
And I'm hoping to have that out by the end of October, beginning of November.
awesome.
I'm putting it out myself. And it's just something for first responders who are struggling, or family members who think they might be struggling, that they can pick up. It's not a journal like most people know. It's like a daily journal. It's to give them an opportunity to write things
Yeah.
down, try to deal with the chaos in their head, and see maybe if they do need extra support. So I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I am in the process as well of writing my memoir, and I'm really excited about that. I'm hoping to get it out next year. And again, just using stories
Yeah.
to provide and inspire hope for people, especially focusing on first responders, to let them know that what they do is incredible and that they deserve to be cared for appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that is so exciting. There's so many good things. By the time this podcast episode is out, your journal potentially could be out. So I will put the link in the episode notes. So if you want to get access to that, it will be down there. I'll put the link there. Once it's done, make sure you send it over to me so I can
I
include
will.
it,
Yeah, for
because I
sure.
would love to get that in as many people's hands as needed. Because what I really love about what you do is you really genuinely want to provide people with tools that will really help them, which is just, it's inspiring to me. And it's so powerful to see this. So I want to ask a couple questions before we get to the final four.
Sure.
And it's a little bit more about your current time, present time. So what would you call this chapter of your life? If you were writing a book, what would you call this chapter of your life?
I would call this Act 3.
Act 3. Okay.
So yeah, and the reason for that is I actually read Jane Fonda. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She's an actress from a long time ago, and she's still around today. But she wrote a memoir, and she divided her life up into 3 acts. So Act 1 was 0 to 30, Act 2 was 30 to 60, and Act 3 was 60 to 90 or longer, depending.
Yeah.
So I just turned 60 next year. But so this is a part of my life where I want to be able to take all of the experiences that I've had in my life up until this point and use that to help the next generations. And I love it. I'm very comfortable with who I am now. I used to try to hide from all of the differences that I had, which were in policing. Being a female, I tried to be one of the guys, when the
Right.
real strength behind being a female in policing is bringing those attributes to the policing world, or for anyone from the LGBTQ community. We all have um, different ways of looking and perceiving, and it's the diversity that we need. So those differences are actually our strengths.
Yeah.
Being diagnosed with a genetic disorder, a life-threatening genetic disorder, has taught me. I was already had an appreciation for life because of my policing career. This just brought it to another level. So I also speak and do Facebook Live conversations with the Loeys-Dietz Society of Canada to encourage and give people a sense of hope that are struggling with a chronic illness. So all of these things, I just feel so blessed to be able to share. And it's like I said to you before, Selena, I feel that stories are the survival guide that people can jump on when they hear someone's story. And I can't take credit for that saying, I read it somewhere a few years ago, and unfortunately I can't remember who said it, but I just thought it's really true. And if more people spoke, and we're speaking out for people who aren't comfortable speaking, and you had alluded to that, doesn't mean that everybody that goes through something will ever be comfortable speaking about it. But for those of us who are, then it's an opportunity to be able to share pieces of knowledge that otherwise, people couldn't. So for me, this is Act 3, and I'm loving it.
I love to hear it. One thing we didn't talk very much about was your chronic pain, or is it
The chronic
illness?
yeah, it's a rare genetic disorder. Yes.
Okay. So what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned from that?
From that,
Yeah.
it taught me that being different can be great.
Mhm.
So with the disorder that I have, it's a connective tissue disorder,
Mhm.
and connective tissue is in all parts of your body. Had we known I had this when I joined the police force, they would never have let me in, but it wasn't discovered until 2005.
Wow.
And one of the biggest issues with it is we are susceptible to vascular dissections anywhere in our body. The aortic root in the heart is the first area they're concerned about. And I had within 12, 14 weeks of being diagnosed, I had an aneurysm and had to have open heart surgery. So it's taught me tenacity. It's taught me that we all have our struggles. And when I think I'm having a bad day, I think about people in my policing career who every day of their life, they weren't given a chance from day one. So it's connected me with some incredible people who in the medical field who do research and they care for people. And it's also, I think, made me realize that those of us that have differences and work with those differences, we're also allowed to have bad days too. And it's something I had wanted to say to you about mental health. Um, you know, having a good journey with mental health doesn't mean you don't ever feel sad or angry or upset. And I think in today's society, we have turned things around to make it seem like they're bad emotions. They're not. Emotions are emotions, and they're there to keep us healthy. So with the syndrome that I have, it started to really help me realize that it's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to feel overwhelmed at times. And then or 2 days or 3 days, whatever it looks like. But just allow yourself to be human, experience what you have, and then keep on trucking.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. I love the lessons that you're able to pull from everything. You're able to look at something that may have been a negative experience in your life and really pull these beautiful positive lessons and share them with us. It has just been such a pleasure to sit down with you today and talk with you. I have 4 final questions that I ask everyone, except I'm going to ask you 5,
Ah,
because I have a special one for you. I'll start with that one.
okay.
So the first one is, since you see like a very vulnerable side of society, or you have seen a very vulnerable side of society, it can be very interesting to hear the answer to this question. Because I've interviewed one other police officer on the podcast, and I asked him the same question, and it was very fascinating to hear his answer. And so that question is, if you could make one law that everybody had to follow, what would that be?
If I could make one law that everybody had to follow, it would be to Oh gosh. There's so many that pop into mind. Did he feel put on the spot too?
Yes, he was like, oh gosh, there's so many things, right?
Yeah,
I
that's
was
just
like, it's hard to think of one.
yeah. And and I guess this is the tough part is just so I've got probably a two-part answer.
Yes.
Is the first one would just be for people, I would legislate people being compassionate and kind and understanding that they don't know the circumstances that somebody else's journey is, and therefore judging people and lashing out at people. If you could legislate that, which you cannot,
No.
then that is what I would do, because so many of the circumstances that people get into are because they don't understand what's going on. So that's one side. The other side would be I think it would deal with driving. If we're just talking laws, it would deal with driving. And I would have to say, because people in society forget that driving is a privilege. It's not a right. You don't turn 16 or 14 or whatever age it is in whatever province and boom, I get to drive no matter what. It's
Right.
a privilege that people are given when they follow the rules of the road. And I've seen so many traumas and tragedies over the years because people forget that driving a vehicle is a privilege. It's not a right. Honestly, if I could legislate, it would be legislating kindness and understanding and compassion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that is a fantastic answer. And I really love what you said about driving. I never thought of it as a privilege versus a right. Like it really is it that is a great light to shine on that. And we would have never had that if I didn't ask that question. But I bet you're gonna
Right.
be thinking of it tonight and you're gonna be like, I have the best
I
answer.
know. Yeah, absolutely. But this is the fun
But
part to the
yes,
question, because you purposely didn't allow us to prepare for it.
yes, yeah. These last ones I don't tell you about unless you've listened to previous ones, you would know. But I try to keep some things a
It's
secret.
fun. It's fun.
Yeah. All right. So now these are the four that I ask everyone I interview. I'm very excited to ask you these because they're my favorite questions. So the first one is, what is the best piece of advice you've received and from whom?
Um, Actually, I think it was from my sister. And sorry, it wasn't from my sister. It was from my mother. My sister, like I said, was much older. And it was just there isn't anything in life you can't do if you set your mind to it. And I know it sounds like a cliche, but where that has helped me in my life, it was when I made the decision to join the police force. It was there isn't anything I can't do. I want to do this, so I'm going to do it. And then I took that within my career and just made choices about. I've been knocked down in my life a lot and had to pick
Mm,
up the pieces and move forward. I saw my brother, and he passed away 4 years ago, but knocked down and brushed himself off and would get back up again, even with all of his challenges. So I really think it's just that, the only thing that's going to stop you from doing something is you. Is what I pulled from what my mother told me. And therefore, if you set your mind to it, and it doesn't work out the first time, then you go back at it, which is what I did with the RCMP, which is what I did with my health, which is what I did with my brother and all of the challenges that he had. And just over and over in life, the only thing that will stop you is you.
wow.
And when I get really frustrated, I will stand back and think about her saying that to me and go, okay, good point. And then see where that fits in the set of circumstances that I'm in.
Yeah, I think so many times we get in our own way a lot.
Yes.
And so I love that piece of advice. That is so, so good. All right. The next one is, what piece of advice would you tell your younger self or someone in the younger generation?
What would I tell? I think that one of my biggest struggles was comparing myself to other people.
Mm,
And gosh, I wasted a lot of time doing that
yeah,
instead of just embracing. There's a reason we weren't all made alike because we're not supposed to be alike.
right.
And I spent so much time in my earlier years trying to fit in, wanting to be like everybody else. And to look like them, to talk like them, to be as smart as them, or to be able to dance like them, everything, to dress like them. And if I had just been able to embrace what made me me and feel like I do today, I'm just me. And if you don't like me, there's nothing I can do about it.
Right.
I mean, I would have been mortified when I was 16 years old or 20 or 25. It took me a while to give myself permission to just be me. So don't waste time comparing yourself to other people. Everybody has a unique voice, even if two people have the same story. And I say this, if you interview 5 people who witnessed an incident, they've all standing side by side, they will give you 5 different stories because they have 5 different voices, and their life story will influence how they saw what happened. So don't compare.
Yeah, that is powerful. I'm curious to know, is there something that led you to that conclusion? I know you said you had to give yourself permission, but was there anything else that really helped you to stop comparing yourself and really embracing yourself?
There was bits and pieces, and it wasn't until I was probably in my late 40s or 50s that I really started to recognize it. So I spent many of my first years of policing trying to be like one of the guys, when in fact where my strength came from was the fact that I was a female. And those attributes actually allowed me to deal with some individuals who were fairly violent in a very different way because I was female. And I'm not going to get into the specifics here, but I was like, wow, that actually worked better than another male showing up, because you know how men like to posture and
Yeah,
who's big and who's stronger. Well, I always knew I would never be stronger in most cases.
yeah,
So I had to find other tools to be able to think. So I started to realize, okay, maybe being a female can be an advantage as a police officer.
yeah.
Maybe having grown up with a handicapped sibling has given me an insight into something that other people haven't seen. Um, Maybe the fact that I look different. And when I say I look different, with the connective tissue disorder, we have extremely long fingers and toes, and our arms are long. And, those same things allowed me to, I guess I could say, when I showed up somewhere at a party, I could say, hey, look what I can do. No one else can.
Right.
But
Yeah.
again, just having fun with the differences. And I think I realized finally, when other people started talking to me about things that I thought made me weird, whatever that means, and they saw them as unique and interesting,
Hmm.
and that most of the noise about being different was in my own head.
Yeah.
And I was perceiving things that weren't even there. And so I think it was bit by bit, little bits and pieces, that I finally put the equation together.
Little building blocks to get to.
Little building blocks to say. And if I had had those lines back when I was 20, yeah, I'm sure there would have been things that would have been much easier for
Mm,
me. And there are things that have passed on to my own kids and to my grandchildren as well. Like, embrace who you are. Don't get caught up in the noise of, you should be or shouldn't be. And, some of the biggest and most important things that were invented, or ideas that came about, came from people who weren't fearful of being different. They just
absolutely.
they just went and did things their own way,
Yeah.
and then we get the results of that. So I think you can be the best you can be when you allow yourself to you take the noise out of your head, stop comparing, and just let yourself flourish from that point.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Oh, I love it. I love it so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, next one. What is some of the worst advice you've received?
What is some of the worst advice I have received? um, Gosh, I've been told, well, um, you know, you might as well quit now because you're female and you shouldn't be in this career anyway. That I need to fit into the crowd. And this was just from people I would have thought were friends. You need to look like everyone else. Well, um, you may look good in that outfit, but I don't look good in that outfit. You
Right.
may pick nursing or pick what well, with my career, I guess I had people that didn't feel I should be going into policing because it was a man's job. I didn't follow that advice.
Right.
um, I kept my own name. I was married for a short time when I was younger, and then remarried 26 years ago. But in that first marriage, I had some difficult advice given to me about, what I should be doing as a spouse, and
Mm.
which I didn't follow either. So I think it was just, without being able to give you probably an exact line, but
Right.
when I was given pieces of information that didn't feel right, and I think we all know what that feels like when someone says something to you. You get a visceral, a physical reaction to the advice,
Mhm.
um, that you just don't follow it.
Absolutely. That was a great answer to that question. Very unique answer, which I love so much. This question always brings up so many different things. So I love the way you
Oh,
answered
great.
that. All right. Last question for you before we wrap it up is what are you grateful for?
Oh, I have so many things to be grateful for. I'm grateful for my health, and I'm grateful for the medical care that I've received. I'm grateful for the career I had. It was an extremely difficult career,
Mhm.
but it was rewarding, and I'm grateful for having been adopted as an infant.
Mhm.
I'm grateful I met my birth mother when I was in my 20s. Um, I am just grateful to be here, knowing that our life journeys are so difficult, and I'm grateful to be able to give back all those blessings and things that I've had for me, to be able to try to be that way for the people in our world that are not having such an easy time.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to sit with you and talk to you. I'm sure we could talk for much longer about 1,000 different things. But it was just so great to learn from you, and you really spread some great awareness around mental health for first responders, but also mental health in general. It was so inspiring to hear you talk and hear all the things that are coming up for you as well, and how you are going to use this third part of your life to educate and share what you've learned with the world. So I just wanted to thank you. It has been such a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Selena. It's been an incredible conversation. I just love what you're doing, especially as a young person. Again, you're having the conversations, no matter what the topic is. This is how we make things better for everybody around us. Please keep doing what you're doing. You're a huge inspiration to me too.
Oh,
And
thank you.
yes, we could talk for hours on end.
Yes, absolutely.